So I talk to a guy that's my financial planner all the time. He's like, you're the only guy that's ever come in my office in all the years that I've been doing this that didn't start with money and sat down and said, Ian, this is what I'm going to do, and this is when it's going to be done by, and this is what's going to happen, and it actually happened. So he's the first person I've ever seen do it, because he always says it to me, and I'm like, well, there's going to be 100 people that come in here and tell you they're going to do this, and then they do it. I don't believe there's thousands of people that have way more money than I do, so they've got to be doing it somehow. And I don't, for whatever reason, he's fascinated with the story. But I'll tell you what the story was for me, just so you know. I said, I'm going to buy one house a year from the time I'm 22 to 30, right? Or probably 32. And I'm going to own 10 houses. And then I'm going to pay them off by the time I'm 45. And then I'm going to have the cash flow from those properties and I'm retiring. That's my plan. That's the plan from day one.
Slightly
right?
aggressive at 22, but okay.
So I got the 10 properties. I paid off the first property, and then I realized that wasn't really the right plan to get there. Those little single family houses that had a ton of equity were good, but I was always going to be putting money into them, and I wouldn't get the cash flow I wanted from them. So I ended up selling them and putting them into a big multifamily deal where all the expenses are really baked in right, and I'm actually getting checks every quarter the way I want on the properties. So I ended up getting there between that and then what we did when we started our own real estate company. But when we started our own real estate company, it was essentially the same thing, which is my initial goal was to add $10,000 a month in cash flow in the first year. Now, I was doing it full time.
Right.
And I had $500,000 or $1 million in cash, and you know where that $1 million or $500,000 in cash was from? The equity from those properties that I bought.
From the first 10?
We took lines of credit against every property that I owned. That's how we started. That was our initial investment dollars.
Oh, no kidding.
Because they had equity in them, but they weren't really making any money. So I'm like, all right, well, you guys are paying me from that company over there. I got nothing to do. I'll take lines of credit against all these houses that have equity in them, and we'll go out and we'll start doing deals.
And that's how it all started?
That's how it all started.
Wow.
Oh, that's a good story. I like that.
So skip single family and go right into multifamily.
No. What you heard was take your single families, but realize they're building equity for you.
Right.
And eventually you'll take that equity and put that into something that creates cash flow for you. That's what I see.
Okay.
And even when I sit down with the guys, I've been analyzing the heck out of this. Should I own, because it's way easier to buy single family properties.
Yep.
Should I own 300 single family properties, and can I make that model work? Right? And I'm struggling with that it costs 45 to 50% of your rent to manage them.
That's the right number, yeah.
And so it's really, really difficult to make cash flow on those at those numbers. But if your idea is, I'm going to own 300 of them, I understand I'm not going to get any cash flow, but as these neighborhoods accelerate equity rise, right? So if you were buying those properties with that strategy in Point Breeze 5 years ago, you'd be sitting on so much equity that you go, all right, well, now's the time to liquidate these assets and go buy a couple multifamily buildings that create cash flow. So the people that own 100, 200 units, I think that the real strategy for the guys that are institutional in nature is the equity grows, we sell them and take the cash from the equity and invest in something else. The smaller guys that are doing it, they don't realize that that's what they're doing, but that's what they're doing.
That's eventually what they're doing.
That's what they end up realizing that down the road, because they finally stop and they go, wait a second, I have 150 properties and I'm only making $75,000 in cash flow.
Right.
But look at all this equity.
Which you can then turn and leverage it up, basically.
Right. But they're running so hard that by the time they realize it, if that market's gotten better, they've gotten all this equity. But I mean, imagine the years of hard work to get there, but the result at the end is always good.
So that kind of brings me to another question. So you said you imagine you had 100 properties in Point Breeze from 8 years ago, right? So do you believe in I'm torn on this. Do you believe in being able to speculate into a market, or do you believe that you just buy your properties and when they take off and you get your Point Breeze, you then decide to sell or leverage them at that point? Because I believe some people believe that they chose the market. A lot of people are pushing Brewery Town right now and stuff like that. The question is, does Brewery Town actually do what it's supposed to do? Do they pump enough capital into there? Is there enough vision there to make it happen, or is there not? So do you believe in speculating so much as, or is there like a balance of speculating versus cash flow versus what I know is right now versus the comps that I have in front of me? What's kind of your take on that when you guys are buying?
Sure. So I don't believe in speculating at all.
I like
right?
it, yeah.
But I think what you're saying, though, you're asking the question is, do I think Brewery Town or one of those places has more room to grow, right? So that's really the question. And so to me, as I look at a Brewery Town, or I look at the edges of Point Breeze, or the edges of Kensington, all those neighborhoods that are kind of going out like this, right? What do I think happens in those neighborhoods, right? So what do we look at? So you look at job growth, right? And you look at population growth, because that's going to tell you, is there enough demand to fill the need that you have in housing? Then you go to the secondary question, which is, okay, if there is going to be enough demand, and even if I have a year or two blip, will there be enough demand long term? Yes, okay. Well then, is this neighborhood one that if I can rent at the current rent that's in the neighborhood, or the lower end of the current rent that's in the neighborhood now, then I feel like I'm okay. Because if you look at the market when it does go down, right, how much did rents go down when the market exploded? They didn't go down at all,
Not
right?
a lot,
In fact, they
yeah.
went up. So the secondary piece of what I would do if I were in those markets is that I would have projects that I could either sell or rent. So we did a project at 42nd and Chestnut Street that was 28 units with the thought that we were going to sell them. But we knew that if we got to the end of that, we got to the building being completed and the market was bad, we would have rented it and we would have made money. And so at this point in the cycle, that's what we do. How do we protect ourselves? We protect ourselves by going, okay, we need to have our product be flexible enough to either hit the for sale market or the for rent market, depending on which one will be strong when this building's done.
That's interesting. So you have an A plan and a B plan. They have to both work. And I don't know, maybe it's your mortgage background or your underwriting background. But so I do a lot of underwriting for what we do. And like the mentality shift that I always have is first thing you do is protect the money. Second thing you do is make the money. So you guys are saying, okay, maybe we make $1 billion on this 28 unit place. If we make none, are we cash flowing? Are we good? And so you have to have both things in place in the event of a market turn, right? You just have to. So that's interesting. And that was exactly what John, when I had sat down with him, the exact same figures of speech that he was using. So obviously it goes straight through your companies, and this is the plan, this is how we do it, and this is how we execute on it. So I don't know, this is a good interview.
It's good.
What do you got, man? Anything else for Gary?
I'm blown away, man. Thank you. Yeah.
Gary, when's your next Ironman? Gary does Ironmans. He said he did a half Ironman. So what's your next physical feat that you're going after?
I'm gonna run a marathon in October.
You ever run one?
I've run a couple in the past, but the goal is to run this one fast.
What speed?
2:59:59 is the goal.
That's clocking.
What's average?
That'd
for a
be
marathon?
6:50-ish a mile
Yeah,
pace.
that's moving. That's
The
moving.
average person probably finishes a marathon in 4.5, 5 hours.
I ran mine in like just under 4, I think it was. And to go to 2:59, you're training.
Yeah,
You're
you're
training. You're
all the
training.
time.
Mine was a non-training situation. That is a training situation. 650 miles is. If anybody's ever seen a marathon, first you want to look at. You've seen guys. The guys who run the front of a marathon. First of all, they're twice as fast as you. Second of all, they're clocking at a speed that you feel like is your full sprint the entire run. And a 650 mile to me, I mean.
It's not that guy.
But that's flying, man. I was doing like a 9 or a 10-minute mile, and I felt like I was 650.
26 miles?
6'2", man.
Oh, I've done that a bunch of times.
Yeah, you go. You're all over.
Well, not in a row.
But here's the thing, right? It's like anything else. You can't imagine doing it, but it's a system, right? Like once you teach your legs to go faster, then you go faster.
Once you run 12, and you run 18, and then you run your 22, and then you're
Raising your
like,
standard in business, just like you're raising your standard in running.
yeah.
Right. You just gotta learn the right things to do.
Everybody always says when you hear the word marathon or Ironman or whatever, they just go, oh, I can't do that, right? And it's like, you already shut yourself off, right? I remember the first time I was like, well, if he can do that, I should be able to do that, And then I'm like, well, I'm gonna try it, and then I just started running, and that was it. And then you're like, oh, this isn't really clocking a 650 mile. I don't know if I'm shutting myself down. It takes a lot of training, but I feel like anybody could do it with the right amount of training.
That's right.
But you got to mentally commit and go for it, right? I mean, that's what you're doing. So October. So okay, you got plenty of time to train, so you're still good there.
I started today.
You did?
Training started
Was it
today.
what's the program? 26 week or something? Was it?
It's this however long it is. I don't know. There's a couple different cycles that we'll go through. There's a first cycle you build up the base, then the second cycle you start to work on speed. So it's a process. If
If you're crazy enough to do it.
Well, if you're crazy enough to want to do it the way I want to do it
Okay.
for some arbitrary number, which means nothing to anybody but me.
Yeah, but now it's locked in your head and you got to do it, right?
I got to do it. Yes, exactly.
Did you run here today?
I did not, but I have done that before. Where I used to, one time on a training run, I parked my car in East Falls, ran down to the city, delivered a set of plans, ran back to East
I like it.
Falls, and then kind of,
make the time, right?
yeah, you got to make it work when you can make it work.
I like the, because I always think about that. You're like, oh, it's so far away, I don't want to drive. You're like, wait a minute, I can run that. Because when you start running marathons, you're like, oh, so that's only like 8 miles away. I can just like, I'll be there in like, you don't think of it like that. People are like 8 miles, but that's just the way it is. You just think about it. So,
Well, my worst training running idea ever was, I said, wouldn't it be great if we just ran 26 miles straight through Philly so people could see how far it really was? So we parked our cars up in Oaks. So to get from Oaks, if you've ever been up there on 422, you can kind of run down that trail and it'll bring you all the way down through the trail in the Army. It was like 24 miles.
oh gosh.
It was awful. It was the most awful run of our entire life. Like
Yeah.
it was bad. It was, don't ever do that. If you're gonna do it, don't do it on that.
Why
particular-
is that?
Because it was
trail was
flat
messy?
and boring, and there was no place. But we got to certain points and we couldn't get water because they were closed. Because we started at like 6 o'clock at night, and
Yep.
then it got dark and there was no light on the trail.
You had to finish. So you
yeah, I had to
do
finish.
It.
It was a nightmare.
That's the Schuylkill River Valley
Scooter
Forge
River Trail, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
I want to bike that. I'm always worried about my knees. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? I
When you get out on the bike, I'll do that with you, buddy. I'd love to get on the
Alright,
bike.
man.
Sounds good. So, Gary, thanks for coming down. Anything you want to tell the world? Or you pretty much have told everybody. Everybody knows about Gary. So, actually, a great interview, man, and we look forward to having you at the Market Makers event. You have a lot of insight. You're an extremely polished guy. You know your world. You know your world and your space very well. So, thank you very much.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Cool. Thanks.